You should be hearing.
Tonight, fresh video from the southern border showing hundreds of migrants detained under a U.S. highway. This humanitarian crisis is just not going away. We will take you there live. And how's this for a crisis? No more bacon. We're going to tell you how a ballot measure in California could change breakfast in the Golden State forever. And they're not a bad thing after all. New research suggests that watching princess movies will not ruin America's youth. That is a loaded tease. The Donlon report starts right now. Good evening to you. I'm Adrienne Banker. Joe is back tomorrow. You want to stick around, though, for everything we have going on tonight. As we all know, the situation at the border is far more than a political issue. It's personal. For everyone who works and lives there, it's an economic and humanitarian crisis. We have a new photo out of Mission, Texas, showing an estimated 1,000 immigrants being held by Border Patrol awaiting processing in tight quarters under the Anzadulas Bridge, not far from a popular crossing area along the Rio Grande River. In nearby La Jolla, Texas, video taken just last night shows another large group of migrants turning themselves over to Border Patrol. That group estimated to be close to 200 people. And of course, this is just one example and only the tip of the immigration iceberg. Customs and Border Patrol officials have encountered more than 1 million immigrants crossing the southern border since October of 2020. That's more than the number of those encountered in all of 2019 when we thought we had seen the worst of it. Many now asking, when will it end? The situation has prompted criticism of the Biden administration from both Democrats and Republicans. Texas Representative Henry Cuellar saying the DHS and border communities are being overwhelmed. And he and Senator Lindsey Graham are calling on the Biden administration to formally name a border czar to handle the crisis hands-on.
You don't have to listen to me. I want you to listen to the border communities, and I want you to listen to the men and women of DHS, their families. This weekend, I just spent about 3 hours with agents and their families and their chiefs there, especially their families. And they don't need pats in the back. They need help down there on the border.
Vice President Kamala Harris is supposed to be tackling the root causes of the crisis, which could very well help things long term. But what about the day-to-day suffering affecting migrants seeking asylum through Mexico and U.S. border communities right now, every single day? Texas Governor Greg Abbott, has opted to take things into his own hands, issuing an executive order to tackle the transportation of migrants released from custody. Abbott says this is to curb the spread of COVID-19, which he believes is linked to the influx of immigrants. Attorney General Merrick Garland has threatened legal action in response to the transportation order, saying it is both dangerous and unlawful. Still, the weight of these problems is an unimaginable burden for these affected communities, charity organizations, and the overwhelmed Border Patrol, who really don't have any of the answers. The question is, what's next for those at the border? And that's where we start today. Joining us now, Julio Rosas, senior writer at townhall.com. He's at the border in McAllen. Right now, Julio, we've seen your video showing a number of migrants who are coughing and sneezing. How frequently are you seeing images like this?
So last night was pretty significant because up until that point, I hadn't really seen a large group like that, and it was probably close to 200 at that point, with as many people, children and adults, coughing and sneezing all at once. And so, I've been coming down to the Rio Grande Valley pretty consistently since March of this year, as the crisis has gotten worse. And that's been a common sound, but at the same time, it wasn't as in such great number. And so that's why when, right now, this whole nationwide topic about the Delta variant of COVID-19, and now we might have to go back to certain restrictions when they were lifted only about a month ago. That's kind of one of the concerning aspects because they might be sick with COVID. They might be sick with something else. We don't know at that point when they're just tearing themselves over. But there have been cases of COVID-19 to be known among the migrants. And in fact, they oftentimes they test positive at a higher rate than some places in the United States.
Well, and there are sick people here, right, in our own hometowns, in our neighborhoods and families. Many people still fearful of the threat of COVID-19. Just last week, I wanted to bring this up to you and find out what you knew about it. Police in the border town of La Jolla issuing a public health announcement when there were migrants caught coughing and sneezing at a local fast food restaurant. And the migrants actually were reportedly telling police that Border Patrol released them because they had COVID-19. So apparently this is a really big topic there along border towns. Are you hearing this on the street?
Absolutely. And in fact, just probably about 20 minutes ago, the Hidalgo County judge, which is where McAllen and La Jolla are in, he issued a disaster proclamation because of the number of migrants coming in, but also just because of the, again, the high percentage of them showing up and testing positive for COVID-19. And so, and he's a Democrat, by the way. So, you know, this isn't a Republican that issued that. So, no, this is certainly an issue that they have been dealing with since March. But the issue is when we're having it's now being reported that they're encountered over 200,000 people in the month of July. I mean, that's more people coming in at an historic rate than what we've seen even just this year in 1 month. And so that is certainly a concern within these border communities. And then, of course, the concern is that they don't stay in McAllen or La Jolla. They continue on elsewhere.
You know, you bring up the judge and his statement, his public disaster proclamation. Could this be a super spreader event? I mean, we here in Chicago just recently had a big music festival. 100,000 people were there every day. But is that what people are saying? Because he was actually upset, criticizing the federal government as well as Governor Greg Abbott because there are no longer any mask mandates in Texas.
I mean, look, I mean, when we're talking about, you know, super spreader events, and it is pretty, it can certainly contribute to the border towns' COVID rate, because obviously, I mean, what Congressman Guerra was talking about earlier about the families of the Border Patrol agents, because the Border Patrol agents, they encounter these people on a day-to-day basis, and then they go home to their local community and they live in the border towns. And so it's not uncommon for them to get sick with COVID if they're not vaccinated, or even if they are. And so it is a concern, and that this is just one aspect to this continuing crisis, right? I mean, that we have the other humanitarian aspects, the conditions that the migrants face, whether they're in stash houses or on the other side of the border or when they're making the trek. So this is a very serious, multifaceted problem that unfortunately the Biden administration just seems to take a blind approach to, because in my opinion, the policies that they've pursued and their approach to the issue of immigration as a whole has led to an incentivization of people crossing the border.
I just have one more question for you, Julio. And again, we're looking at these pictures of the number of immigrants coming over. This is still about people, and oftentimes women and children, whether they're sick or not, coming over to the border, some risking their lives to get here, some running for their lives to get here. What have you seen in terms of compassion? I know there's a lot of economic concern from these border towns. I know there's the health scare. But in terms of charitable assistance for these families, what are you seeing?
So there have been a lot of nonprofits taking, kind of filling in the gap to make sure that they get what they need, whether it's water or food or shelter. But even still, that they are facing a problem because they've never had to deal with so many people in such a short amount of time. And that was another reason why the Hidalgo County judge issued that disaster proclamation, because even not only is Border Patrol and the federal government and the city are having logistical issues, but also the nonprofits as well. Yeah. And so again, that just points to the fact that this is historic. They have never seen this many people crossing continually. I mean, we're in August now, and it's as if nothing has changed since early February. Yeah. So they are trying to step in, but again, it's just because there's so many that they're even having trouble keeping up.
Yeah, everyone overwhelmed. And again, no easy answers. Thank you, Julio, for joining us. Julio Rosas, senior writer at townhall.com. Thank you. Michael Cutler, retired senior special agent, Immigration and Naturalization Service, joining us now. Michael, you spent 30 years with the INS. We want to be transparent. You are an advocate for low immigration or allowing fewer people to cross the border, and always legally. So my first question to you is about Border Patrol. I've asked them if there is any positive news to report back after this harrowing 10 months where we've seen a rise, a surge in the number of women and families, and of course, men and single people crossing over the border. Do you have something good to say? Is there any hopeful news?
Well, the only good news is the judge has ruled that DACA applications can no longer be accepted by Homeland Security. Pardon me, but the policies of the Biden administration, and by the way, let me be clear, my position is that the immigration laws need to be enforced. And we already admit more than 1 million lawful immigrants every year. We give them green cards, they're on the path to citizenship. The point is our laws are designed to protect national security, public safety, public health, and the jobs and wages of Americans. The system has become so overwhelmed, and ironically, we're coming up on the 20th anniversary of the terror attacks of 9/11. As an immigration agent, I've arrested and investigated terrorists, which is why I've testified before numerous hearings, and I gave testimony to the 9/11 Commission. And what's not being reported in the news, but it has been the subject of congressional hearings, is that Hezbollah, a Middle East terror organization controlled by Iran, is working in close coordination with human traffickers and drug smugglers throughout Latin America, moving narcotics and people into the country, including sleeper agents. So when we look at this catastrophe that I believe has been encouraged, aided, and abetted by the Biden administration, and full disclosure, I'm a lifelong registered Democrat. This isn't a left-right issue. But I am concerned about national security. I live in New York. The ashes from 9/11 landed on my home. My neighbors died. So when we have massive numbers of people coming into the country, and we know that Hezbollah is working with human traffickers throughout Latin America, and there are terror training camps in the tri-border region of Brazil, Venezuela working closely with Iran also, this should be sounding alarm bells all over Washington and throughout the country, because as one of your guests said before, the folks that come into the border aren't staying in the border, they're heading to the rest of the country. Sanctuary cities are basically hiding them, which violates the immigration laws, Title 8, United States Code Section 1324, that deals with smuggling, transportation, aiding, abetting, and inducing people to come here in violation of law. You have to ask yourself a simple question. Where in what Biden is doing is there any good news for the average American or the lawful immigrants? You know, you have people coming legally with the expectation that they're getting away from the criminals and the poverty that they left behind. What we're finding are that criminal aliens are moving with the huge numbers, and not just from Latin America, but from all over the world. So
right. And again, I know you, Michael, are an advocate of the fact that the legal way of immigrating to this country is not broken, that, again, it serves the public good. But do you think that we need an update to some of the immigration and naturalization policies? Because, I mean, again, there's a reason why people are coming over and not following the legal process in such large numbers.
Well, it's because too many people are profiting. It's become a delivery system. So rather than protect national security and the jobs and wages of Americans, it provides a limitless supply of cheap foreign labor, a limitless supply of foreign tourists, and for the immigration lawyers on both sides of the aisle, it provides a limitless supply of clients. So everyone's making huge amounts of money, but American wages are suffering, American jobs are suffering, and on top of that, we have national security, public safety, and public health concerns. We need interior enforcement so that when people come into the country, they know that there will be consequences if they violate our laws. There is no interior enforcement also with the Biden administration. He's ordered the ICE agents, immigration agents, to stand down and not arrest aliens, even if they're here illegally, even if there's an outstanding warrant of deportation, unless they have serious convictions for crime. Sleeper agents generally have no convictions, and the huge numbers are overwhelming everything and the environment. If we're concerned about the environment, think of the damage that does also. We've really got to get a handle on who we're letting in, and it's not just the Mexican border. We are a nation of 50 border states.
Well, this is a question and this is a problem that will require more conversations. Thank you so much, Michael Cutler, retired senior special agent, Immigration and Naturalization Service. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
We have to turn now to another topic. A new report from the House Foreign Affairs Committee has found evidence suggesting COVID-19 was, quote, accidentally released from the Wuhan Institution of Virology before September 12th of 2019. The shocking report has lawmakers wondering how this happened and why we're finding out right now. For more, I want to turn now and welcome the host of On Balance, Leland Vitter.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you, too. I mean, there have been so many different reports, and it seems that the more we go on with this, the more accreditation or the more credibility is being lent to the idea that this was manufactured and released.
Well, we've come a long way, because remember back in April of last year, if you brought up the lab leak theory, you were a tin hat wearing racist conspiracy theorist. So for a while, this wasn't really investigated. What this report does by the Republicans on the Foreign Affairs Committee is connect a number of the dots that we knew were out there into one cohesive report. And what they're saying essentially is the preponderance of the evidence shows that it probably came from the lab. Why? We know they were doing gain-of-function research inside this lab on coronaviruses. Two, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence, including reports of viral pneumonia going through Wuhan that was very similar to what COVID became in 2019. They put those two dots together. They put some of the funding dots together. They put together the reports from the U.S. intelligence agencies that there were a number of scientists from the lab were in a hospital in Wuhan with COVID-like symptoms back in 2019, before the Chinese Communist Party put this story out there or even acknowledged that it existed. You put all those dots together, and they say preponderance of the evidence goes to lab leak.
So was it just that there was a lot of or what appeared to be anti-Chinese sentiment linked to the people who were the whistleblowers initially of this, including former President Trump, that denied this research from being connected?
Well, that's the great question, right? And China had a lot to do with it as well. They hopped on it as soon as Tom Cotton brought up the lab leak theory. It was their ambassador, the Chinese ambassador to the United States, that came out and called it a racist theory and said that it was xenophobic and on and on and on and on. But the media sort of shut down any valid discussion. The famous Facebook fact checkers wouldn't allow this kind of conversation on Facebook or any type of evidence about the lab leak theory until just a couple of months ago. So why now? And you think about it, it's taken this long to get this far in the investigation. It's also given the Chinese this much time to destroy all the evidence.
And this was considered something that was accidentally leaked. This newest report doesn't say that it was some type of biological warfare. And then, we have to think about what is next now that this is released.
Well, yeah, you have to cut that question pretty thin, though, right? Because we know that the Chinese Communist Party doesn't really distinguish between military and civilian research. So the People's Liberation Army would have access to everything that was being done in that lab. So was this a biological weapon that they were planning on using? We'll never know. There's no evidence that this was an intentional release, an intentional attack, but we know that the Chinese have done a lot of research in how to use viruses militarily in a bioweapons way, and also how to try to engineer them to make them worse for certain races as well. So it's not really too far of a leap to think that this may have happened accidentally, but at the same time, it may have been something that in the future they would have been willing to do.
Well, I know you're going to continue to cover this story. You really broke this story open, so we appreciate your reporting.
Thank you.
All right, Leland Show On Balance. It airs right after our program.
That's me.
That's you. Great picture, by the way. Great hair. Airs right here on News Nation, 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central. Stay tuned for that. The former commander of U.S. forces in Afghanistan says we have abandoned all hope for democracy there. The current president of Afghanistan blaming U.S. withdrawal for the Taliban running rampant. We're on that next. And another violent incident in the sky. Passengers throwing punches during a flight. This is becoming all too common. We'll tell you what started it. And don't forget to follow us on social media at the Donlon Report on Twitter. The U.S. general who commanded U.S. troops in Afghanistan and led the successful Iraq surge says America has abandoned Afghanistan. General David Petraeus telling the UK Times the rest of the world will see we are not supporting democracy or maintaining the values we promote around the world. He warned the country could see a brutal civil war similar to when the Taliban took control in the 1990s. Meantime, the New York Times reporting hundreds of thousands of Afghanis are fleeing the country, fearing another Taliban takeover and all that could come with it. Retired Brigadier Army General Anthony Tata served in Afghanistan and the Pentagon. He joins us now. First of all, thank you, General, for being with us. Afghanistan's president now blaming the Taliban surge on the U.S. withdrawal, calling that pullout sudden. Was this sudden or unexpected?
Well, Adrian, thanks. Great to be with you. I don't know that 20 years would equate to sudden, and I'm not sure I agree with David Petraeus's assessment that we're abandoning Afghanistan. We gave it 20 years. We gave it thousands of lives, and I think we did our very best to really rebuild the Afghan military, the Afghan police, and their political capacity. We worked very hard at making sure that they could defend themselves. And at the end of the day, Afghanistan is somewhat of a synthetic country. They have lots of valleys and peaks, and they have lots of Hatfields and McCoys, and it's hard to pull them together from the northeast, the very mountainous region, to the southwest, the very desert area, and everything in between. And it's just a tough nut to crack. And we didn't invade Afghanistan, so all the comparisons to Russia coming in there and all of that are false comparisons. We came in to get rid of the Taliban, which or the Al Qaeda, and to defeat the Taliban. And at the end of the day, Bush, Cheney, Wolfowitz, Pearl, Feith, all of those people blew it. And we had the chance to kind of lance that boil and destroy, not defeat, Taliban and Al Qaeda, but they were too focused on Iraq, and it took us 10 years to get bin Laden, and it was Rumsfeld and Cheney and all of those clowns that took their eye off the ball and wanted to go into Iraq. And so we were left with what we were left with. And 20 years later, we've had a lot of generals, a lot of privates, and everything in between do their level best. And it was time to get out of there.
Well, you have some strong words for some of those officials, absolutely. But I do want to go back to what you said about former CIA Director Petraeus's comments, because he's been warning for a long time that a troop withdrawal would by no means stop the endless war in Afghanistan. But again, this terror, this Taliban terror, do you think that there's a chance of destroying essentially the Taliban?
No, the Taliban, when we didn't go after the sanctuary in Pakistan, we sowed the seeds for continuous war, which I'm not sure what Cheney and Bush and Rumsfeld and all of them were seeking, but they got what was obvious to those of us that were serving in the 18th Airborne Corps at the time. I was a brigade commander in the 101st Airborne, expecting to go to Afghanistan, and got told in January 2002 I was diverted from the force flow to Afghanistan to go to Iraq. And I'm like, what's in Iraq? And there was nothing that we should have been going after in Iraq. And so the whole head fake was really laid the foundry for what's happening today. And I don't care if we spent 5 more minutes, 5 more days, 5 more months, 5 more years, 5 more decades in Afghanistan, the result would not be any different. They would wait us out. They have sanctuary in Pakistan, and they can do whatever they wish to do. And we gave it our best effort to help the forces in Afghanistan and the government defend themselves. And we'll see what happens.
Let's see what happens, too, with the other surrounding countries. We want to bring up Iran, the U.S. promising action against the country after a drone attack on a freighter that killed 2 crew members. Here's what Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said.
Iran continues to act with tremendous irresponsibility. We are in very close contact and coordination with the United Kingdom, Israel, Romania, and other countries, and there will be a collective response.
General, what do you make of this? I mean, what can the U.S. and allies do? Afghanistan obviously has an effect on the surrounding countries in that very turbulent Middle Eastern region, especially as the U.S. is actually lifting sanctions.
Yeah, so Adrian, I'm not sure that our action in Afghanistan has much material effect in Iran. It's, the border there is in the irrelevant part of Iran, really. But, the actions that this administration is taking toward Iran, lifting the sanctions, moving toward the JCPOA, trying to get the Iran nuclear deal back in place, are totally irresponsible. President Trump was right on the money to cancel that deal that didn't force Iran to stop their exporting of terror. They are the major destabilizing force in the Middle East. They have Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthi rebels, and the Shia militias all throughout Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen to take on Western interests in that region. And so this administration is really lost. You could tell with Blinken, he doesn't really believe what he says there. He's struggling to say anything negative about Iran. And they talk out of both sides of their mouth. Blinken says that, but privately, he and Kerry and others are meeting with Iran, trying to get back to the nuclear deal. It's really a duplicitous policy, and it's really bad for the United States. And what's worse is the mainstream media is just putting wind behind their sails, not investigating anything, not curious about what this administration's policies are, and it really has a negative effect on the United States and our foreign policy and our future.
Well, our future is definitely in focus now because this is going to change everything. We just don't know how at this time. Retired Brigadier Army General Anthony Tata, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Adrian.
Alabama, 215%, and Arkansas, 206%. This increase in vaccination rates in states that have been lagging is a positive trend. Americans are seeing the risk and impact of being unvaccinated and responding with action. And that's what it's going to take to get us out of this pandemic.
That today from Jeff Zients, the White House COVID coordinator. Also today, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham announcing on Twitter he's positive for COVID-19, but says he's glad he was vaccinated. News Nation's Allison Harris is live in Washington with more on the story. Allison.
Yeah, Adrian, right there, we're seeing the White House COVID response team talking about vaccinations increasing, and they're talking about the possibility of breakthrough cases, too, today, talking about that. While here in Washington, the first U.S. senator who is fully vaccinated has tested positive. That is Senator Lindsey Graham. He broke that news today himself, confirming that he tested positive after he was on Senator Joe Manchin's houseboat over the weekend, not just with Senator Manchin, but a whole group of lawmakers. And some of these are very high-ranking, high-profile lawmakers. We know that Graham has tested positive. Senator Joe Manchin has tested negative. He is fully vaccinated. Senator Graham is fully vaccinated. And now, just as you're tossing to me, Adrian, we got a statement from Senator Chris Coons. He, too, was there. He has tested negative. But there are questions tonight, and we're racing to report whether this could be a larger outbreak on Capitol Hill. Lindsey Graham tweeted today that he has flu-like symptoms. He has a mild case. That's what Dr. Fauci and that White House COVID response team talked about today, that the breakthrough cases will be more rare. They are more likely to be asymptomatic and mild. That's what Graham says he has, just flu-like symptoms, a mild case. But he also tweeted, and take a look at this, I'm very glad I was vaccinated because without vaccination, I'm certain I would not feel as well as I do now. That's significant, as we've seen very recently more and more Republicans speaking out in support of vaccination. And as I mentioned, perhaps, as the White House and the president's spokesperson talked about today, maybe that is one of the reasons why we've seen vaccinations increase, doubling in some of the states with the highest cases. Right now, this past week, the U.S. has seen the highest vaccinations it has seen in the past month, as they're talking about some of those increases in some areas by 200%. But tonight, we're following this possible outbreak. Right now, it's only one senator who was at that event confirmed. But Adrian, moving forward over the next 10 days, these senators are going to try and get a reconciliation deal done. Democrats really want that $3.5 trillion deal to pass. All of them would have to be there, not quarantining, not testing positive for COVID, in order to get that deal done.
Wow. That certainly does put it in perspective. Thank you so much, Allison. Yeah. We want you to take a look at this. Dramatic body cam footage leads to a group of police officers in Miami charged with battery. We'll have details of this case coming up. And in Portland, a city overcome with violence over the past year now can't find enough police officers to fight gun crimes. A retired Portland captain joins us after the break. Another violent weekend in some of our major cities. In New York, 10 people shot in Queens in one incident. 2 suspects pulled guns on a crowd and started shooting. 7 bystanders were hit, along with 3 gang members. 2 others arrived and helped the shooters escape on mopeds. Also in New York this weekend, a brazen robbery. Police say an armed suspect shows a gun, demands items, and shoots the victim, who still manages to get away. A security camera catching this footage. In Chicago, another 51 people shot over the weekend. Just this weekend, 8 people killed. Now in Miami Beach, Florida, 5 officers are charged with battery following an arrest at a hotel in South Beach. The whole thing captured on body cam. Brian Enton joins us live now from Miami Beach. Brian, show us this video.
Yeah, Adrian, you know, the video is disturbing. The state attorney here actually called what happened unfathomable. It all started with a guy in trouble for a parking violation on his scooter. He took off on the run from police, and this is where the video picks up. It's inside the lobby here in the hotel behind me. Police chase him here. He gives up. He gives in. He's handcuffed, he's on the ground of the lobby, and that is when all of these officers basically jump on top of him, and one after another, several officers kick this man in the head. They punch him. They slam his head into the ground, and they basically just take turns kicking him. You mentioned all 5 of those officers now charged with battery. But take a look at this other piece of video from a different body camera. This is where the prosecutor says it went from bad to worse. There's just a bystander standing there shooting this whole thing with his cell phone as it goes down in the lobby of the hotel. Police don't like that he's shooting, apparently, and then they just tackle this innocent bystander. Listen to what the state attorney here said this afternoon.
When we saw that kick to the head, and then we replayed it, and we'd see all the other kicks that preceded it, it was just unfathomable. It was unspeakable. It was just inexcusable.
It's up to you. Sure. So the 5 officers now, Adrian, are charged with misdemeanor battery. They all showed up to the police station today for processing, but since it's a misdemeanor, they were not taken to jail.
Brian, did anybody in the community respond yet? We saw that response by government officials, leaders there, city leaders, but anybody, any groups coming to the young man's defense?
Yeah, absolutely. The NAACP was very, very quick to speak out, not happy, obviously, about what they saw. And frankly, a lot of people in this community are not happy to see 5 police officers treating a man like that, all of it starting over a parking violation on a scooter.
You wonder, are the police speaking out yet? Because you wonder what wasn't captured, right? Your mind wants to try to solve this and think of what could have happened, what could have led up to this beyond a scooter parking violation.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's always sort of 2 sides to every story, right? What we're hearing from several police sources is that after this initial violation, parking violation happened, and this guy tried to take off on the scooter, he may have sort of softly struck one of the Miami Beach police officers and then kept running. And obviously, when you run from the police, you know, they were very, very amped up. No excuse for what you saw in that video, but that's at least part of the backstory here.
And you're saying that he may have attempted to actually hit an officer?
Unclear if he attempted to, but when he tried to take off from that parking violation, at some point, he did strike an officer. There were no serious injuries or anything like that because he was on a scooter. But yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and you just see the violent response from those officers. Thank you so much, Brian, for your reporting from South Beach. Next up, a Washington Post investigation reports that police have shot and killed more than 6,400 people since 2015. The report putting it this way: in the United States, fatal shootings by police are both rare and constant. Now, if that doesn't make sense to you, give us a moment. We're going to be breaking that down. While more white people are shot in America each year, the report says police shoot Black Americans at a much higher rate as a share of the population, more than twice the rate, in fact. Nate Jones, a researcher and writer of the report, joins us now. Nate, thank you for joining us. Your report says America is awash in guns. So are these mostly shootings where we're seeing the police respond too quickly to violent crimes?
Well, what we know from going through the data is that most of these police killings are of people that are in possession of guns. The majority are legally justified, but at the same time, that does not mean that they were necessarily. Some were, others we don't know. But the vast majority of them were police shooting armed individuals.
Now, I don't want to compare what we just saw with our reporter Brian Enton to your story because you're talking about actual deaths, but we've seen cases where there is a question about excessive force. But you're bringing up cases where, again, you say it's rare but constant, meaning that you're not finding that police officers are hunting people down and killing them every day. Is that what you're saying? But yet at the same time, we're seeing a consistent death toll from police-involved shootings.
Right. I mean, there are millions of times that police and the public engage every day, and a very small fraction of them, about 1,000 a year, result in police fatalities. So they're rare because the vast majority of public encounters with police are peaceful, but yet every day, just about, there is an officer-involved fatality. And a bit strangely, there's been over 1,000 every single year for the past 6 years since the Post began tracking these.
Do you think that there is a need for presenting data that shows how many times police officers are shot, not only shot and killed, but targeted? Because it seems to be that a lot of people are questioning a rise or seeing a rise in those kinds of cases as well, as if there's this war going on in the streets.
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely the more data, the better. I can speak to the Post data. While we started counting was because there wasn't any data about officer-involved shootings. And we looked, and the FBI started tracking some of this, but it was voluntary what police departments had to give. So we started tracking by looking at news clips, looking at social media, filing state public records address, and that was the only way that we could get a count. Absolutely, it would be good if there was a count for times that officers were shot at by others. The more data is certainly better.
Yeah, and I know, Nate, that you've done a lot of research in terms of keeping accountability at the forefront for the police force and the community they serve. Thank you so much, Nate Jones of the Washington Post. We appreciate you joining us.
Thanks.
Can you believe the state of California may soon be without bacon? We're going to explain that one coming up with an actual hog farmer. And whatever happened to the friendly skies, more fists flying on a flight. We're going to tell you how that all started next. Okay, so we've talked about the rising number of unruly passengers in recent months. We want to bring you one of the most shocking instances from just this weekend, brought on by a stuck passenger seat. The footage shows two men swinging at each other in the cabin of an American Airlines flight Sunday as fellow travelers begged them to stop so they wouldn't hurt anyone else on the plane. Stop! Oh my goodness. Okay. Everybody needs to just calm down. Hopefully you'll calm down after hearing this story because it's going to raise a lot of eyebrows. If you're a big fan of bacon, at least if you live in California and you're a big fan of bacon, you might be a bit disappointed. A bacon shortage is expected in the state due to an animal welfare proposition. Joining me now, Brian Duncan, the vice president of the Illinois Farm Bureau. Brian, what are we talking about here? I don't understand. Why can we not have, I see I'm all like tongue-tied. Why is there no bacon in California soon?
Well, it's a little thing called Prop 12. It's a voter initiative that was passed several years ago that sets some pretty arbitrary, unscientific, and unfortunate standards for pork that's being sold in California. And those standards are not currently in practice on most farms across the country, mine included. And the result is, really uncertainty what the future holds when this law is supposed to take effect.
So does that mean that if you're a farmer and you currently do business as you've been doing for years and years and years, because you do not comply with Prop 12 in California, you cannot ship your bacon to California.
Exactly. So I deal with a major processor that buys my live hogs, and then they ship it all around the country. And the way pork is processed, it's very hard to segregate. And yeah, so it's going to be a real challenge for the processors to source product that complies with this. Again, let me just say this. I agree that every animal needs to be well cared for. Unfortunately, Prop 12 in California does not achieve that goal. In fact, in many ways, the space requirements take us further away from what we've learned as good animal husbandry in the hog industry.
Well, real quick, we have 20 seconds. How hard is this going to hit your business?
Well, estimated is a $3 billion to $5 billion hit for America's pork producers to comply.
$3 billion.
And I think there's $3 to $5 billion to build the new facilities. And then all of us are asking ourselves, if we build these facilities to comply, what's the next proposition that California is going to pass?
Oh my
goodness. And will
goodness.
we be compliant then? It's very uncertain. It's unfortunate. I still contend it violates the Commerce Clause. Hopefully someone can intervene here.
Fingers crossed they do, because so many Californians still love bacon, even though we like veggies.